Hey, what's going on, roleplayers? It's Drow Bard here and welcome back to the corner. We're continuing on with our analysis series and there's a lot to get through today, so let's kick things off with the Battle Master.
Do you recall that light? Or do you ever think of me?
So Fighter's often considered to be a bit of a plain Jane character. There's not a lot of variation in the abilities that it gets during its level progression. But what I think really defines every character is the archetype that you attach to it, and I think Battle Master is one of the most flexible and most diverse ones that you can have. Compare that to a rogue, and if you know that you're dealing with a thief, then you know you're dealing with someone who has extra actions and a few other little tricks up their sleeve. If you're dealing with an assassin, you know that you've got someone who's going to be aiming for that surprise strike, and if you've got an arcane trickster, well, the bag is a little bit more mixed there. However, when it comes to a Battle Master, if someone were to describe themselves as a Battle Master, you don't necessarily know what's coming. You don't really know exactly what capabilities they have. I still feel though that a character only really achieves worth depending on how much you put into it. And it's almost to the point where certain other classes actually stifle your creativity. Certain classes have certain strengths that you essentially need to play to. You don't have to follow those rules, but it really helps if you do so. At the same time, certain classes also have a particular philosophy or outlook on life. Paladins are a great example of this. So it puts you on this narrow path when it comes to developing your character. Fighters aren't like that. Fighters are what I would consider to be the blank slate of all of the character classes available in 5th edition. Fighter, as I've said before, is very much defined by their feat selection, and in the case of the Battle Master, they're even further defined by the types of maneuvers that they choose to take.
In your world somewhere, do memories rip and tear?
So now we kick things off with the Battle Master's combat superiority, and this is separated into 3 sections: your maneuvers, your superiority dice, and your saving throws. So essentially what you can do, how well you can do it, and how difficult it is to resist. So you start out with 3 maneuvers, getting an additional 2 at level 7, 10 and 15. But the nice thing about these is that you can also swap out maneuvers that you don't use anymore, or if you feel you built your character in the wrong way, you can swap them out when you get one of these jumps, and then that way you can actually get hold of the maneuvers that you're really going to make good use of. So next you have your actual superiority dice, and these start out at d8s, which is very good to start with. They get stronger as you progress in levels, but we'll get onto that later. So they start out at d8, which is roughly the equivalent of a longsword when it comes to damage. Now, not all of your superiority dice deal damage. Some of the other maneuvers have other things like temporary hit points or better accuracy, but for the most part you'll be seeing a large damage increase when it comes to using these particular maneuvers. You get 4 superiority die per short or long rest. You also get an additional superiority die at level 7 and again at level 15. So if you don't have the opportunity to take short rests, at least you've got a fair few under your belt. In that respect, don't be afraid to get really crazy with the amount that you're using your maneuvers, because you should be looking to take short rests as and when you can. So if you do end up using all of them in a single combat, I don't personally see it as a problem. You can just short rest, someone's bound to want to get some hit points back anyway, and then you can just refresh all of your superiority die ready for the next encounter. Some of your maneuvers require your target to make a saving throw against the technique. This follows the same formula as most saving throws, 8 plus proficiency modifier plus an ability score modifier. However, the fighter does get their choice of either strength or dexterity based on whichever one you prefer. So if you have a strength based fighter, obviously you're going to want to use strength, and the same goes for dexterity, which just adds to the fact that, again, no 2 fighters are really alike. So looking at the class, things really start to happen at level 7, level 10 and level 15. So you're gaining additional maneuvers for all of those levels. You're also gaining additional superiority die at level 7 and level 15. And you're also gaining improved superiority die at level 10. At level 10 your superiority die switch from d8s to d10s, and then from d10s to d12s at level 18. Just based on those few bits of information, you'll see that what you get at level 7, 10 and 15 can all be very important, so you want to consider each of those milestones should your character be looking to do any multi-classing, because you want to know exactly what you're getting and what you're missing out on by leaving your current class and going into another. So now we're going to cover each individual maneuver that the Battlemaster has, and this is where the analysis portion of the video really kicks in, and this is also where we're going to be spending a lot of our time. So first up is the Commander's Strike, and it can make you the unsung hero of an adventuring party and the rogue's best friend. However, for all the possibilities and flexibility that this ability will offer you, there is a very serious action sink involved in it. So let's go over it. So you need to take the attack action. You then have to forego one of your attacks. You then use your bonus action to give that attack to someone else, and then they have to spend their reaction in order to make this extra attack. However, that extra attack does also get your superiority die added on as damage. Now that is an absolutely enormous investment, however it can be worth it if you're targeting the right people in your party. So essentially, if you were to target someone like a rogue, they only get to use their sneak attack once per turn, but since they've had their turn, or are about to take their turn, then it doesn't count against their overall usage. So it can be really beneficial for characters like rogues, allowing them multiple sneak attacks within a round. You want to use this to give the people who have the strongest hits more actions and more attacks. So again, you want to give this to the rogue if they've got a decent sneak attack. You want to give it to the barbarian if they're dealing more damage per swing than you are. Another really great use of this ability is if you're dealing with someone who's under the influence of, say, magic weapon or elemental weapon, then you want to be able to give them extra actions so they can get so much more mileage out of whatever enchantments they're using at the time. Really intelligent or really tactical creatures don't open themselves up to attacks of opportunity that often, so therefore you won't get to use your reactions as much as you would like. This would go for the rest of your party as well, so being able to sub out one of your attacks and allow them to use another attack at the cost of their reaction isn't always such a bad loss, therefore it can be very tactical and very advantageous. However, this ability is a little bit limiting, and the limiting factor is the bonus action that you need in order to activate it. As well as having to make your own attack action, the bonus action requirement limits you to only being able to gift this once per round. Commander's Strike is still though one of my favourite manoeuvres, and I feel I could say a lot more about it, but we need to move on. So from here on out it gets a little bit easier. Disarming Attack does exactly what it says on the tin. Its superiority dice gives you a boost to damage, and the creature has to make a strength check or drop whatever it's holding. So this is really useful when it comes to any kind of finesse character. Rogues will suffer particularly when it comes to this ability. Also you can use it for other things like wizards who are using wands, or basically any other creature who's going to use an item that you just don't want them to have in their hands. This maneuver is good, but it's not great. You're not going to be using this against monsters, and you certainly don't want to be attempting it against some greatsword wielders, especially greatsword wielding fighters, because they're going to have high strength and they have proficiency with their strength score as well. So you're not going to be disarming many of the big weapons, and most of the monsters that you're fighting are just going to be using tooth and claw, so you're not going to get as much mileage out of Disarming Attack as you would like. Distracting Attack allows you to deal extra damage to the target, but the next time an ally makes an attack against that target, they have advantage on that attack roll. Personally, I feel that Distracting Attack is an ability for select circumstances, in that you don't want to be looking for any kind of reason to not get an advantage. That is to say, you need to be looking for as many different ways to get an advantage, even if it's just the high ground, or a flank, or any other way. You don't really want to be using abilities that grant you an advantage. You want to be using your tactics to get an advantage, and therefore using your abilities for other things. I don't particularly like Distracting Attack in that regard. The flip side of that, however, is if you're at a disadvantage, at least you can bring yourself up to a standard roll without having to take the lower number. But the same argument can be made. You should not be allowing yourself to get into those positions in the first place. So evasive footwork is fairly unique. You get to roll your superiority die and add the number that you rolled to your AC until you finish moving. This is a repositioning tool. It allows you to get into a better position without any fear of being struck. There is no fear of reprisal. However, One of the better uses I would think for it is if you want to single out a specific target. If you're going to go charging through the ranks in order to get to that particular person that you want to engage with in a battle, then you're going to potentially take a whole bunch of attacks of opportunity in order to get there. Evasive footwork helps you to mitigate loads of that because your AC is just going to be so much higher. It's a great way for you to lock down the creature that you want by engaging it in combat without having to worry about all the minions in the front row beforehand. I don't actually see anyone using evasive footwork, however, so let me know if any of you are having any kind of success with it. Feinting attack is essentially in the same boat as distracting attack. You get an advantage on your next attack roll, but you have to perform some kind of act or meet some kind of condition in order to do so. As with distracting attack, you need to make a successful attack first before one of your party members can get a bonus to their attack. Feinting attack works in a similar way, except you get the advantage, but it costs you your bonus action, a thing that isn't really worth it, and you should be looking for more opportunities to naturally get advantage, such as flanking or high ground. You don't want to be wasting actions in order to get yourself something that you could get just with some clever tactics or positioning. So essentially, I think this was meant to be the duelist's ability. It has to be used against someone who's within 5 feet of you. This means you can't use it with ranged attacks, and you can't use it with pole-on weapons that have reach. It has to be used when you're toe-to-toe. If you did use this with a ranged attack, you're only going to get disadvantage anyway, because you get disadvantage on range rolls whenever you're within 5 feet of a hostile creature, even if it's not the one that you're attacking. Potentially useful for getting out of a disadvantage, but again, you should be looking to get as much advantage as you can anyway, so that should never really be an issue. Still, an archer could take advantage of this, especially in a dungeon environment. If you're going to be surprised by someone and you find yourself caught up in a melee, then a quick feinting attack could be what you need to at least give yourself an attack roll that doesn't have disadvantage. So it's not like you always have control over your positioning anyway. So there will be some uses for it. I just think situational is not as good as when you're looking at the general purpose uses for abilities. Goading attack is a very good anti-fighter tool. It deals extra damage when it connects, but the real benefit is the fact that they have to make a wisdom save or to get disadvantage against any other creature that they attack except for you. This means that they want to concentrate their attacks in your direction in order to have the most chance of hitting. The problem with it, however, is it doesn't actually prevent them from attacking another party member, so that even though they will have disadvantage, there's still the chance that they could hit anyway if they choose to attack somebody else. Also, it doesn't affect how their spells work. If you have a spell that doesn't require an attack roll, they're not going to get a disadvantage on that either. So you have to really pick your targets. This is why I would consider it an anti-fighter tool and not a tanking tool. I really want to like goading attack because of what it's intended to do, but they've tried to build their whole advantage-disadvantage mechanic around these sort of abilities, and to me it just doesn't do the job properly, because in any situation where you can give yourself an advantage, or even use an ability like feinting attack, you can then mitigate the disadvantage that you would get from something like goading attack. The two just cancel each other out, and it's like nothing has really happened, apart from the fact that the initiating fighter who used the goading attack has got a little bit of extra damage. This is just where the advantage-disadvantage system falls down. I love the game, but it's not that great a mechanic. I know a lot of people think it's the best thing since sliced bread because it mitigates a load of numbers, but it just really doesn't work that well. I think instead of the advantage-disadvantage system, I think what this ability should have been is to minus their attack roll against any other creature that isn't the goading attacker. I know this puts us back in the same position of adding and subtracting numbers and mathematics, but the simple fact remains, however, if they have an advantage, they can either get an advantage attack against you, which isn't good, or they can at least mitigate the disadvantage to the point where they can attack any of your other party members normally. So it's still not great in my opinion. However, this really does work if you're keeping an eye on the battlefield. Check to see who's getting an advantage and who isn't, and target the ones who aren't getting an advantage. That way, you can make sure that their attacks are always nullified against anyone else other than yourself. It keeps them focused on you. This isn't always going to be the case, however, when it comes to particular creatures who you want to make sure you're locking down, but there are other tools that can do that just as well, if not better. A useful ability in some situations, however, it's just not as great as it could be because of the mechanic they chose to apply to it. Lunging attack is something that I don't see getting a lot of usage, but then again, I don't think it's the best of abilities. Essentially, you're giving yourself an extra 5 foot of distance. Now, this can be useful if you want to attack someone who's directly behind another player or another person, but the thing is, they're going to get cover from that attack as well. It can be done, it's just a little bit harder to do. So that's one good use for lunging attack, but for the most part, you're not going to be using it. You're just going to be repositioning to a point where you can get a better strike on the target you really want to hit. Lunging attack is particularly good for single strike characters. So for example, if you have a fighter rogue multi-class, lunging attack can be very good. You can move, make your lunge attack, and then continue to move without being in a position where you're going to take an attack of opportunity. If you have multiple attacks, then you might want to consider something like Commander Strike. You can then move, make your lunging attack, and still give up one of your other strikes because you're not going to be making multiple lunging attacks. It's pretty good if you have a regular reach weapon and you're attacking from the back row, but remember that anything that's in front of you will still grant cover to your target. And if you're planning on making that a persistent tactic, in that you are wanting to attack from behind a wall of other people, then you should just be using a reach weapon anyway. And that's the other sad thing about lunging attack. It doesn't even benefit polearm masters. You're trying to find yourself at a safe position and then make a lunging attack which isn't going to leave you open to any enemy retaliation. Well, this is what polearms tend to do anyway, so they're not going to get any benefit from the lunging attack. I really like maneuvering attack. It's a party repositioning tool. So essentially what you're doing is you're allowing a party member to move using their reaction and move up to half speed without provoking an attack of opportunity. Absolutely great for getting someone like a hard-hitting barbarian in combat with the target that they really want to without taking any additional damage. Likewise, this is great for getting poorly armored characters out of a sticky situation, so it's very useful for allowing wizards to move unhindered, allowing them to get back to the rear of the line where they're not going to be subject to enemy attacks. Just remember, this only works against the particular creature that you're targeting with your maneuvering attack. Only they lose their attack of opportunity. Other creatures will still have access to attacks of opportunity. However, you do have access to multiple attacks as a fighter, and you can use it to potentially mitigate multiple attacks of opportunity on separate characters, so that's something that's worth considering. Menacing attack is very much like goading attack in that you can create disadvantage in the thing that you're targeting, but menacing attack is just so much better. At least in many situations anyway, because not only are you causing disadvantage on attack rolls, you're also causing disadvantage in ability checks. Additionally, the creature can't actually move towards the subject of its fear, so it gives you a lot more positional advantage. The only time you would pick goading attack over menacing attack is if the creature is immune to fear, and that's pretty much the only time you'll ever want to use it, because menacing attack is going to do exactly the same thing as goading attack and more. The only way to break that fear effect is to get away from the creature that is causing it, and that means finding total cover. It's not enough to just hide behind another creature or just be in that line of effect. You have to actually be completely out of their view, and so it might even mean that other creatures are going to be moving away just so that they're not having to be at disadvantage for certain other things. The one benefit that goading attack does have over menacing attack is that menacing attack's fear effect can be blocked if something is in a heavily obscured area and therefore cannot see the target of its fear. But that's a very situational thing, and it doesn't happen all that often. Unless you're dealing with a lot of casters who like to take advantage of things like darkness, it's not going to be a massive problem that you're going to be dealing with all the time. Parry is a nice, simple ability. It's really useful for things like tanks, but it's also just a good general purpose skill to have. Expend your superiority die, add your dexterity modifier, whatever that total is, that's how much you reduce the damage of the attack by. A really useful ability. You can't really say much more about parry except for the fact it's a very good pickup if you really aren't sure what to take. If you have a full complement of maneuvers that you like to use but you don't know what to get because you've got a spare one, parry is a worthy consideration. You only get one bite of the cherry when it comes to parry, however. You need to spend your reaction in order to use it. So essentially what you want to do is figure out what the average damage roll is that you're going to be able to reduce using your parry ability, and then when you get hit for that much damage, then you want to use it. It's not quite so bad if you're only getting hit once per turn, because you only have to make that decision once. Of course, if you're getting hit with multiple attacks, then it might be worth leaving it until you get struck by something a bit more damaging, so that you're not losing all of that potential parry damage reduction. A lot of abilities tend to proc when it comes to actually hitting the target, so that you don't waste them. Precision attack isn't quite like that, because you need to spend it after you've made your attack roll, but before you see what the result is. At least in that sense, it's a little bit safer to use, so you're not potentially wasting it if you don't think you can roll high enough to hit what you think the AC of the creature might be. I still think this is a worthy consideration, however. Really useful if you have a disadvantage and you still want to be able to hit. Really useful for testing the water against certain enemies who you don't know what their armor capabilities are like. I think one of the best uses for this ability is to use it with Great Weapon Master builds. You want to be taking that -5 as often as you can so that you can get the +10 damage, but in doing so you lose a lot of your potential attack roll. By using precision attack, you can mitigate a lot of that. This allows you to increase your uptime on your Great Weapon Master ability, meaning you can continue to do really high and really consistent damage. I would consider this to be better than Fainting Attack. You get that bonus added onto your roll, so you can still potentially hit even if you're at a disadvantage. Even though Fainting Attack is giving you a bonus to damage, as I've already said before, by being able to hit more often, you're increasing your uptime with Great Weapon Master. And with Great Weapon Master, if you're lucky enough to get a critical hit or put a creature to 0 hit points, you can then use your bonus action to make another attack, which can benefit from the +10 damage as well. Precision attack is really excellent. I don't think enough people are using it. I've not really seen anyone taking advantage of it. I think it's something that gets overlooked because it doesn't really do anything flashy. It doesn't hit multiple times, it doesn't knock back, it doesn't knock down. But what it does do is it gives you consistency. And if there's one thing that's really important in combat, in D&D, it's consistency. Consistently hitting, consistently dealing damage, meaning that you can deal with creatures faster and allow you to save resources such as healing. So a really good pick, one I don't see people using, and it should definitely be in your arsenal. Pushing attack is excellent. A creature has to make a strength save or suffer a 15-foot pushback. This is great whether you're using melee or ranged attacks. It only affects creatures that are large or smaller, however it's still a really good pick. Great for sniping people off of ledges, pushing people off of cliffs. It's absolutely fantastic, and the damage that creatures take from falling can do so much more than just weapon attacks alone. This isn't always going to be the case, however. You're going to be in areas where there aren't environmental hazards, but you still want to take advantage of pushing attack. You want to be able to move the target around, mostly because it stops people from getting advantage against you. So for example, if creatures have an advantage against you due to flanking for instance, and you manage to push one of them away, then neither one of them is then getting an advantage. Other characters on their turn might be able to intercept and prevent them from getting an advantage against you again. So it's a really useful tool, even for just getting yourself into a better, more protected position. You can use it to knock creatures to the side so that you can give your other party members a clear run so that they don't get attacks of opportunity against them. You can knock creatures into traps if there aren't any other kind of environmental hazards around. It's a really versatile tool, and I think it's one of the best ones that you can have in your arsenal. Rally I really like because it takes a lot of the hassle away from the other party members who do most of the healing, so characters like bards or clerics. Rally offers up some temporary hit points and a good amount of them as well. Not only are you getting your superiority die, but you're also getting your charisma modifier as well, so it's well worth having if you have a high charisma. You have to use your bonus action in order to gift these temporary hit points, however, and that can be a bit of a problem because you might want to spend your bonus action on other things. Rally is still really useful, however. It's a great temporary buffer in case you get into a situation where your party members are taking a lot of damage and you can't get to them in time. In certain situations, because you're dealing with temporary hit points, you need to consider the fact that not every character is going to want them. Warlocks, for instance, casting Armour of Agathis are going to want to keep their own temporary hit points because it increases the uptime on the amount of damage that they can do retributively with that spell. If they gain a second set of temporary hit points and they choose to take those over their original ones, then they lose access to that spell. So in instances like that, they're not going to want the temporary hit points. If anyone is using something like Inspiring Leader, and the current amount of temporary hit points that they are applying to another character exceed what you're giving with Rally, then again they're not going to be able to take advantage of it. They're not going to want to use it because temporary hit points overwrite each other. They don't stack. So it's not always going to be the useful ability that you need it to be, but it's just great in a pinch. Riposte is excellent. You only get to use it once per round because it requires your reaction, but still, you're getting an extra attack which also has additional damage. You can use this ability when a target misses you, so it's great to combine this with other party members' abilities such as Cutting Words or Bane. This also comes in really handy anytime a creature is at a disadvantage. Because you're going to be missed so often because of these conditions, essentially every round you have the potential to put in a riposte if you're being attacked in melee combat. Again, this is another ability that allows you to get more mileage out of spells like Magic Weapon or Elemental Weapon. Spells like this one and other similar ones gain more benefit the more attacks that you can use with that particular weapon. So for example, a Polearm Master, I know I use this example a lot, but because you can make the bonus attack with the same weapon, you get the same enchantment bonus added on. And it's the same instance here. The more often you can use that same weapon that's been enchanted, the more effect you can get. If you yourself have been enchanted and you deal extra damage, for example, due to something like Divine Favor, again, that's just more damage that you can be doing. Sweeping attack is great for blitzing large groups, so if you want to put damage onto other targets, it's a really good option. Typically it's better to wear down a single target rather than spread your damage and attacks around. However, in select circumstances, being able to attack multiple creatures is going to be the more effective option. This is a great complement to wizards who are using area of effect spells that deal damage, therefore you can start mopping up by attacking multiple creatures at the same time. It's also potentially very good if you have a hunter ranger in your group who uses Colossus Slayer. By being able to tag another creature with a little bit of damage, they are then below their maximum, meaning that the ranger can start to use his Colossus Slayer that much earlier, and you guys can start mopping up the battlefield before things get too far out of hand. A nice little side note is that if creatures are provoking attacks of opportunity, you can still potentially use Sweeping Attack to deal some additional damage to somebody else. As we've said before, it's often in your best interest to continue working on the painted target and wear a single creature down and deal with them one at a time. In this instance, however, certain other creatures might be provoking attacks of opportunity, and in that instance you'll be able to sweep across to the target that you've been working on, so you can still get benefit out of this. If other creatures are provoking attacks of opportunity but you're working on somebody else, then at least you can continue to apply damage where you want it. Sweeping attack may have a couple of conditions that you need to meet in order to use it, but it's definitely worth adding to your list of abilities. Especially considering in low levels you only have access to maybe one attack at a time, so being able to apply damage to multiple things is always a good strategy. This is excellent in low levels because you can potentially take out two targets at once if they have low hit points, such as goblins or kobolds. Kobolds could easily be one shot by a sweeping attack, meaning you can take out two at a time. Even if you don't manage to kill off a creature in one go, that extra damage can still be of use to you. If you're using something like Polearm Master or a two-weapon fighting style, then that bonus attack, even though it's doing low damage, is potentially just enough to finish off that creature with that small attack, because you've put sweeping damage onto it beforehand. I personally really like sweeping attack a lot, and if I'm playing a fighter, it's one I like to pick up regularly. Finally, we get onto tripping attack. This is also a sensible pick. Prone is something we like to have on our targets because it gives us an advantage on attack rolls and it gives them a disadvantage. This is potentially really good not just for combat but also for chasing down fleeing targets. You can use this attack with either melee or ranged attacks, so considering the fact that many creatures move at the same speed, any kind of chase sequence is going to be a little bit awkward to try to get around. But with something like tripping attack, you can potentially knock them down, hit them on the floor. Their only option then is to crawl or to use part of their movement in order to get back up, which is going to slow their overall speed. That way you'll be able to catch up with them that much quicker and then do whatever it is you need to do as part of the story progression once you've captured your target. Both pushing attack and tripping attack are in a very similar position because they both affect the same type of creature, they both require the same kind of save, and they both have an effect. I would consider perhaps that tripping attack isn't quite as useful because it makes them prone, but then again it's horses for courses, isn't it? If you get more advantage by having something prone and you're not one for pushing the enemy around the battlefield, then it's essentially your fighting style. So either one of them is good. I just prefer pushing attack, but then again tripping attack is also one that can be really advantageous in the right situations. So we're going to round out the video now with the last few little abilities that the Battlemaster gets. You start off by gaining an additional proficiency with any artisan tool of your choice. Student of War is essentially there to give you the ability to forge the things you need to fulfill your role as a Battlemaster, but I always think a free proficiency in some kind of artisan's tool is just enough to give you that little bit of extra spice to your character, to give you a little something that you could potentially have, maybe even as just a character's hobby, something that will allow them to be a little bit more than just a damage sponge or a damage dealer. So next up is Know Your Enemy. You can spend 1 minute outside of combat interacting with or observing a creature, and this will potentially give you access to certain bits of information. So you can learn whether or not a creature is your equal, superior or inferior when it comes to any two of the following, which is strength, dex, con, AC, fighter levels or total character levels. This is a tool that has function, but it's not one that you can always use because a whole uninterrupted minute is a very long time. Chances are most of the time you're going to be taking advantage of figuring out whether a creature has either superior or inferior armor class or hit point total. When it comes to other things like class levels, that usually only comes with certain types of creatures or specific races that would normally be used as character classes. However, if you do encounter another humanoid, it probably is worth trying to figure out just how many class levels they have. After all, dealing with a wizard, for example, that's got 5 class levels is a very different experience than dealing with a wizard that has 15. The thing about Know Your Enemy is that it's not an exact science. Another example would be if you want to know if a creature is your superior or inferior when it comes to something like hit points, for example, they could be your superior based on a single hit point. They could be your superior based on 100 hit points, or even more. So all it gives you is a rough estimation. Still, it's something you should use all the time if you can even remember that you have it. I think it's one of those abilities that either gets overlooked, is multi-classed out of before you get to it, or just seems a little bit superfluous considering the fact that you're just usually interested in getting to the next encounter and dealing with that. But use it as often as you can. After an encounter that lasts at least a minute where there was no combat, turn to your DM and say, is this character my superior or inferior in regards to, and then just pick any of the two that are available. So it might seem obvious to some, but maybe not so much to others. When you have the main villain and they're doing their monologue bit, where they're telling you how they're going to take over the world, you don't need to use this, because they're going to be your superior in some way, shape or form, probably in most things. If it's a wizard, alright, they're not going to have higher strength than you, but that's really not important. The thing is, you're not going to be put up against something that's inferior to you. You can pretty much guarantee that someone is going to be better than you because you have to take that thing down. Where you want to use this is when you interact with certain people who you're just not sure about. And what I mean by that is, are they the kind of character that's going to just be a flavour, an NPC, someone that you can just interact with, or are they actually going to be a plot point? So when you ask your DM, is my character superior or inferior to them in regards to this particular stat or this particular set of hit points, not only does it make that character a little bit more believable, but it also gives an indication as to whether or not the character could be used for something else. So for example, what might have been just a simple NPC to give you some exposition, the DM might actually think, well, they took the time to use that ability to question his statistics. Maybe he could be a little bit more than just the NPC with the next quest. So improved combat superiority, we've technically already gone over it. At level 10 your superiority die increased to d10s, and at level 18 your superiority die increased to d12s. The only real reason I bring this up at this point is because if you are thinking of making a character who's multi-classed, know that at this point, level 10, you're going to get that additional superiority die, but also you're going to get additional maneuvers as well. As such, knowing that you're going to get all those bonuses as well as an improvement on all the skills that you already have, you have to make that decision as to whether or not it's worth staying on for a few more levels in order to get those bonuses, or if you want to move into something else and start benefiting from what the other classes have to offer. Relentless is your last ability, and it's a little bit of a poor one in my personal opinion. If you have no uses of your superiority die left, then whenever you roll initiative, you get one extra use. At least you can contribute to the battle in some way, but only for one maneuver. But at least it's something you can do. This ability is a safety net. If you haven't had the chance to have a short rest, or you got into another encounter that you just weren't expecting, at least you get a free use. But a safety net at this point in the game is a little bit difficult to swallow. You should have had something a little bit more powerful. I really don't think it's the best ability. I really can't see it coming up that often, if at all. By the time you hit level 15, experienced parties are going to find good places to rest. They're going to make sure they're prepared before every fight. So you're not going to be making any use of this. The only time you can really make use of it is if you get surprised and you're forced into another encounter. But even then, you've still got enough tools under your belt in order to be a practical fighter, and everyone else in the party has still probably got enough resources left to make that encounter a walkthrough anyway. So the use of Relentless, I really can't see it happening. It's there if you need it, but again, if you've planned properly, like any good adventuring party should, you should never ever have use for this. Wow, that took ages to get done, but finally it's finished, and hopefully you guys have picked up a few new ideas about the Battle Master, and hopefully it gives you a chance to look at certain fighter character classes in a different light. I'm sorry this video has taken as long as it has to get uploaded, but there's been a few problems on this end, which has caused me to get set back a couple of weeks with everything that I'm doing. So what I'll do is I'll do another quick little video in a few days just to address those points and let you know where we are with certain other topics on the channel. But as it is, there's just been a lot of craziness happening, and I'm not going to go into it now because this video is already over half an hour long. Either way, doom and gloom aside, we're back on track now, and hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. So make sure you leave a like if you got anything out of it. If there's anything you'd like to add, or if you've had any success with any of these particular aspects of the Battle Master, let me know all about it in the comment section. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't had a chance to subscribe yet, why not do so? There's a great community of people here sharing ideas, and it would be great to have you as a part of it. And with all that being said, I will see you guys next time at the gaming table.